let's continue our modeling of the barrel. Now we're going to take this barrel and add more topology to it. So currently it's a very low res model. If we go ahead and open up our poly count heads up display, you'll see that currently this is only 564 faces or 1052 triangles. So it's a relatively lightweight model. And you know, we have some pretty decent detail in it that we're starting to achieve, especially with this asymmetrical top and things like that. But let's go ahead and really add some weight to it, so to speak. So there's multiple ways to do this. In mesh, you actually have a smooth button, so we can sit here and smooth it and start to get a great result. But there's more that we can do right off the bat. So what I like to do is use something called Smooth Mesh Preview. Smooth Mesh Preview is if you go ahead and hit 3 on your keyboard, it will kind of give you a smooth and a smoothed out preview of that actual item. So it's very important that we kind of utilize this so we don't have to keep smoothing and undoing. Now the cooler thing is, so that was 3 on your keyboard. 1 will go back to normal. 2 will actually give you this shell, and you got to look really closely, but you see there's like a little shell around it. It's like this little cage, and what this cage is this allows you to use your polygon tools and actually add to this mesh, and the cage is actually the low res mesh, and the smooth mesh is actually contained inside of it. So let's go ahead and add some faces and fun to this. So let's look at the top too. We want to, again, when we do this, you want to look at every single piece to make sure there's no complete or total errors. So what I typically like to do with the smooth mesh preview is I like to use tools like the insert edge loop tool, and I'll come in here and I'll work on my creases. So that's always fun. And do that, and let's do it down here as well. As you can see immediately, let's go back to 3. That gives us a tighter crease on that, which is really nice. It darkens it up. I'm going to do the same thing down here, and you don't need to have your shell mode on. You can just work in regular mode once you get accustomed, so to speak, to what you're doing in here. So you can see right there, yeah, that's definitely a lot nicer. And again, remember we can select edge loops by going to edge mode and double clicking. It may get a little difficult when you start having more than one edge, so just keep that in mind. You can see here I actually had a little hidden edge that I must have put it on. So I'm going to continue to work on that and keep adding the faces. That's going to really work itself out and give us some nice density to this mesh. So let's keep doing that, and holding the control key again, and I'm going to put one there, and you can see it tightens it up. That's the best way I can describe it, tightening it up there. We can see that mesh, so darken it up there. Great. That's looking really, really awesome. And we have our dents in these too, so we're going to kind of play with those in a second after we get this meshed out. So let me go back to 3 mode and let's turn off wireframe on shading so we can see. Definitely getting there. Now you can see already just by those couple of faces, we've pretty much doubled our polygon count. It's up to 20,000, actually more than doubled, because before I believe it was only 1,054. Now it's 20,640. That's quite a bit. Now, when you get it to a place that you want it, you have to actually convert it to permanently go that way. So I'm going to save it, and let me actually save it as something else. I canceled that out on purpose. We'll call it Hi Start. There we go. And I'm going to delete my history. Try to clean that up a little bit. Keep that workflow in mind. And then I'm going to go to Modify, Convert, and then you'll see it says Smooth Mesh Preview to Polygons. So when you click that, you'll notice the mesh the mesh is there. You have quite a bit of mesh at that point. Here you have a poly smooth face input. So if I go into that poly smooth face input, I actually have two divisions. If I hold my middle mouse button down, notice I'm clicking on the blue and holding that down, I can kind of play with those divisions. Now, what I want to do next is I actually want to up these, because we're going to do a cool little trick with these when we get closer to what we need to do. But I'm going to up it to maybe 3. You know what? Let's just really make it green. Typically 3 is actually really good. I'm not going to go any further. But it's super, super dense now. And the cool thing we can do now is utilize some of my sculpt tools. So I'm going to save this. That's important. You know, you can see I'm at 82,000 polygons. Right now, this is like getting to film resolution. You typically wouldn't have a barrel in a video game, because if it's this dense, it would be really slow to move around it or interact with it. We would typically have our low-res barrel that way. But let's go ahead and let's do some sculpting. So let's see, where did they hide? I gotta find where they hide the sculpting tool. And then it will be fun as the sun. So we're gonna look for the sculpting tool, which is, there it is, right in front of my face. Mesh tools, sculpting tools. So we have the sculpt tool, the pinch tool, the spray tool, the wax tool, the scrape tool, the knife tool. What do these do? Well, at this point, you just got to play with them. So if I open the knife tool, for instance, and I cut in, at first glance, you're going to go, oh, that doesn't really do much. But if you double click on the tool, you get some options. So we get strength. We can play with our stylus. We can play with the, we can do a stamp, which is really actually a pretty nice kind of method. So you can go and open up, if you want to stamp like a Bristol brush or something on it, you can do that. We can take this down a little bit, so we don't need that much. So you can see you can start making cuts, and that's really neat. That's just with the knife tool. Let's see what other tools we have. Let's go to the basic sculpt tool. If I reset that tool, if I hit B for brush, and I drag my middle mouse button up and down with the B as brush key held in, that will help. So we can kind of start playing with some of this stuff, which is kind of neat. You know, these sculpt tools have multiple options in which that you can kind of play around with. You can play with the mirroring, you can play with the direction, you can invert it. So if you invert it, it actually scoops it in here. We can lower the brush, again, hold the B key and drag it down, and we can cut into it. Again, I use very minimal strength. That typically, you know, adds dents and things like that. So we can start sculpting in there. There's other programs like ZBrush, obviously, and Mudbox that are, you may have heard of, that will actually do this nicely. We have the spray tool. Let's see, the spray tool will actually, again, they have our world stamps here. Will actually spray on textures, which is really cool. So if we really wanted to get just a little bit of texture going on there, we could. Let's look at the stamps and see what we actually have in here. Maybe we have something that can really help us out here. Let's see. We got gravel, that's kind of cool. Coral tile, rebel kind of sounds like it would fit. So let's use that, and let's see what we get with the rebel brush. Yeah. So we can invert it. Maybe this thing's beaten up on certain sides. Again, it's not pretty, but it's going to give you elements that you typically wouldn't have if it wasn't for these brushes. So keep playing with those. again, you can play with the stylus or the fall off. You can play with the display. You can show the wireframe as you're bunching it in. There's all sorts of options that, you know, again, I suggest that you kind of explore here. And at any point, you know, there's ways to like go back, obviously. So keep that in mind when you're working here. So this one's like an acid metal. That's actually really cool. Look at that. That's neat. All right. So I'm going to click on that one and just kind of go in and maybe corrode. I want to try to avoid some areas. So corrode some areas. This one's seemingly working out really well. Changing some of the settings in there. Just getting that worn out, environmentally rusted kind of can feel to it. Corrode some of these areas in here. Again, you can't do this unless you have that dense mesh. So that's something to keep in mind as you move forward with this. There we go. All right. So let's go back here. Let's get out of our sculpt brush. And what you'll find is we have a pretty beat up, rusted shape. Pretty neat, right? So you can kind of see some texture going on. We can see the can is pretty beat up. Again, I can take these divisions down still. That's my low res, that's kind of my medium res, but you're not going to get as much detail. And so I don't suggest doing that. I suggest kind of keeping it. Actually, let's go up to 5. Let's see what we can get. See if we crash it. There's a high possibility my Maya will crash, but you can see by doing a super high res, we start getting like way too many artifacts. It's like this is not, like Maya is not having it. So let's go back down to 4. Let's see what we get. Not my favorite. 3 is where to be. That gives us just a nice amount of like corrosion. So again, pretty cool. What else can we do with this? Well, we can dent this in other ways as well. We can use deformations, and we can kind of go into our deformation. One of the ones is called a lattice. So if you open up a lattice and we add, let's see, let's add 4 divisions here, maybe 5. There we go. We can go into the lattice, and when you select it, this is kind of a cool one, you can go to lattice point, and you know, we can bulge areas, we can pull areas out. So this is kind of like it's grabbing clusters of vertices essentially, and it's kind of helping you sculpt it into place. So again, the whole purpose of this is just to get a nice uniform feel. So when you get something you like, when you get a certain point, you can actually, you know, do your delete by type, and you can actually delete lattices as well if need be. So at some point, there it is, lattice. You can kind of delete that if that's not something that you want to use. So keep that in mind as you keep going forward. And see, I do delete all type. It kept the deformation for me. But now we have a super dense mesh. Now let's go ahead and import that other mesh into here. So I'm going to do a file import, and I'm going to grab my HiRezBarrel, which is in my barrel project. Good thing I saved. And it was called the start file. And it's there. It's like right on top of it. There you go. And there are my 2 barrels. All right. 1, 2. They're pretty much the same shape. One is pretty dented, one is not. Now the whole purpose of why we do a high res and low res model is because when we get into texturing, we actually want to transfer this bumpiness to the 8000 mesh model. And so that's something that is going to help our speed. But you can see this is, you know, actually this is 1000 triangles. and this is 82,000 triangles. So this is the winner, but this one looks better. So now we have to kind of figure out how to transfer those together. And to do that, again, we're going to use something called normal mapping. I'm going to just briefly do this for you in the next lesson. But go ahead and get to this point, model your barrel out, whatever you want to do. It's just practice. And make sure that you have the low res and the high res right on top of each other like this, you can see. And we'll go from there.